I currently have a Mercedes W126 sedan up here on the lift for some suspension work. Now these are very popular cars. They were made from 1980 all the way up to 1991. So you have 11 years of production on these sedans, and they came in both diesel and gas models. So there's a lot of them still out there on the road. Now in my experience over the years, I found these are very prone to a common suspension problem, and that's this part right here. This is the front suspension brake rod control joint. It's a ball joint right in here, and it connects to this rod right here, so when you brake the car, the suspension control arm cannot move aft and it cannot move forward. So what happens is, over time, this part deteriorates, the ball joint gets water and it rusts, gets loose, and one of the real common signs is this is a problem if you have a W126, is when you drive over rough ground, it'll clunk, and if you hit the brakes, you'll hear this little clunk, and you'll kind of feel it in the suspension, because that means this lower rod here is moving back and forth, and it's making noise right here in this joint. So what you have to do is replace these. But this particular job is really fraught with some risk. It can just turn into a big wrench dance, particularly if your car has been subjected to road salt. And this area right in here is rusty. Now I'm going to show you this car. I'm going to show you how we start on this project. I won't be doing a complete video here on how to replace this, as I have instructions available that come with my kit on my website, but I do want to show you this problem and how you can deal with it if you should run into it if you have a rusty W126. So I'm going to go grab my ratchet wrench, and we're going to take it and put it on these bolts that hold this aluminum casting up to the subframe. And I'm going to see how easily these bolts come out, because you're looking at a rust-free car here. Before I start wrenching, I want to show you a close-up of this joint right in here. Look at that. See, the rubber seals all deteriorated, and you can see this has been wearing. Here's that rod I was telling you about. And so all the wear is right in here in this ball joint. And that's what's causing the clunking on this car. Now this car just has a little over 150,000 miles on it. So this has a lot more to do with age than it does mileage in particular. Particularly if you've had this subject to a lot of water, you're in a high water environment. I found a lot of water splashing around here tends to accelerate the wear on these joints. But this is a very common wear item on these W126, and something that you're probably going to have to replace if you end up owning or you currently own one. So here's the aluminum casting I was talking about earlier. It's kind of an L casting. It attaches at this point with a long bolt, swings around over this side, attaches here with a long bolt, then it's attached to a cross brace that goes over to the other casting with 3 bolts here. The problem are these long bolts that go up into these nut plates. You'll get rust up in the nut plate. You'll try to turn this bolt and this will break off and it'll just spin. How are you going to get a wrench in here to get a hold of any nut that might still exist? But let's see on this car, you can see here we don't have any rust at all. So I've grabbed my ratchet extension. I'm going to put a 19mm socket on this, and let's see how, look at that. Now what you're doing is you're watching this nut plate to make sure it's not under a lot of stress. There it's moving, see right there? So look at this. This is coming right out. Normally, if I even suspect a little amount of rust, I'll get some rust buster or penetrating oil and soak that nut plate real well. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this one out so we can take a close look at it. Now, this is probably one of the easiest ones I've ever removed, because once again, you're looking at a rust-free car. And so I'm just going to get the wrench over on this other one to make sure it's not frozen. If I start to turn on this and it won't move, then we're going to stop and we're going to soak these up with some sort of rust penetrant. But see, look, this one's coming off easily as well. I'm not going to remove it at this point. Now let me take you outside. I've got another car that has been subjected to road salt, and we're going to show you the problem you might run into. You can't believe how many emails I've received over the years, people working on their 126 front suspension and trying to get this control rod support joint replaced. And they write to me in a panic, say, no, the nut plate broke off and it's just spinning. What do I do? And of course, I've sent emails, explained ways I go about getting that bolt out, and I finally decided to shoot a video, but I never had a subject. Well, here I found a subject. Here's a 1981 300 SD, came out of Vancouver, Canada, and yes, it's been subject to road salt. You don't think it looks that bad here, but the problem with these rusty cars, particularly road salt rust, is everywhere you go underneath the car, you start to work on something, it's rusty and hard to get off, and it just goes on and on and on. That's why I recommend try to avoid cars that have been subject to road salt cans. Some people can't, I understand that. So we've got an example here of one that is rusty. Let's take a closer look and see if I can get this one loose with that ratchet wrench. Well, here you can see why I said this is a good candidate. Take a look at that rust right there. I know, this is going to be a problem. But before I put the wrench to it to see if I can loosen that long bolt, I'm going to go ahead and soak this up with rust penetrant. Really get in that hole there. You can see the rust coming out. And I'm just going to soak that like crazy. I'm going to let this sit for about a half hour. Then I'll come back and let's see if we can get the bolt to move at all. Okay, I'm back. Let's give it a try with this long ratchet and socket. I know some of you are thinking, well, Kent, why don't you get this 24-inch breaker bar so you can be sure and get that bolt loose? Well, I found if you have to use anything bigger than this, you're going to break that nut plate off because it should not require that much torque. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this bolt to move at all. Oh man, look at that. Oh, gee. Okay, I got it to move. Oh man, it's not coming. Shoot, let's see what the nut plate looks like here. Oh no, look at that. Oh no, the nut plate just broke off. And the nut's moving. See, I can move it a little bit, but the nut's moving in there. So take a look. How am I going to get anything in there to get a hold of that nut to hold it, to even try to begin to get this long bolt out? Now, you can't cut the head of the bolt off. If you cut the head of the bolt off, you're never going to get the bolt out of this enclosed chamber here. So if I'm going to cut the bolt, I've got to cut it in here. So we have a couple options. We either have to get in this hole and get a hold of that nut on that nut plate so we can turn the bolt, or we have to come in here and cut the nut off so it'll come out. So those are the options we're going to look at, and I'm going to show you some of the tricks I've used over the years to deal with this problem right here. Of course, the first thing you want to do is get some compressed air and blow this area out. You really need a clear view of what you're working with. Oh, gee. Be sure and wear a respirator when you're doing this. Notice I've got a really long nozzle here, but you can see the rust coming out of that hole. This is not going to be pretty, I can guarantee it. I finally got the bolt to turn, but look what's happening with that nut plate gone. You can look in that hole and you can see that nut just spinning. So the question is, how are we going to get a hold of that nut, or what are we going to do to get this bolt out of here? It's important to really clean the area here. You can see I've cleaned this out, and if you're looking in there, you can see that the nut is still square. You know, if that nut is rounded off, yeah, it's going to be more difficult. But maybe we could get a wrench on it. But that's 22 millimeter, look. It won't go in the hole. So that's going to require some modification. Maybe you got some needle nose vice grips. Let's see if we can get a hold of it with needle nose vice grips. The problem is you can't get the needle nose vice grips spread enough, and even if you do, they're not going to hold, especially when that thing's rusty like that. I can't think of what I want to say here, but I'm going to try real hard. So it's time to try. No, what should I say, Jerson? You got any ideas?
We're going to go the next step on the ladder.
All right, we got to try something else because those two options are not going to work. So we're going to try to drill that nut off by drilling one side and then turning it and drilling the other side to break the nut free of the bolt. Now we're using a very high quality, high speed drill bit. Don't buy no cheap drill bit if you're going to try this. All right, we've drilled through that one side. Now we're going to rotate this bolt 180 degrees and drill the other side. So if everything works like we hope it will, we should be able to split that nut in half. And that will allow us to drop the bolt out the bottom. Yeah, we decided the old cordless drill just didn't have enough power. So we needed a little more power and speed to get through that nut. Look at this. Success. The bolt is out. And look at that nut. Notice how we've got a hole drilled through both ends. And also notice it didn't break apart. I didn't have to break it apart because once we drilled through both sides of the nut, it loosened up the threads enough that I was able to go in there and grab a hold of that with some long needle nose pliers, and the bolt came out. Fortunately, most of the rust above those threads is all eaten away, so this came out fairly easily. Now I did use a 22/32 drill bit. Notice this is a high-speed drill bit. I would probably use a 3/8. Give me a little bit bigger cut on this bolt. These are the type of drill bits you get, at the hardware store or other places, and they will not last. You have to buy an expensive, high-speed steel drill bit, and I would recommend 3/8 in size. So you drill through one side, rotate it, drill through the other side. If it won't come and you do need to split it, just go in here with a chisel and chisel one side, and it'll spread it apart enough to where the bolt will basically just drop out. Now you're going to say, well, Kent, what happens if there's not enough of a nut left to even drill through it? And that can happen. Well, in that case, what you're going to have to do is go in there with a multi-tool and a special metal blade. It's going to take a very long time, and you're going to have to cut through the bolt. You might be able to get one of these little Sawzall blades and just get right underneath the nut and cut it off and cut the bolt off. But if I have a nut like this that's at least intact, still square, then I prefer the drilling method because I'm not going to damage any part of the hole in there when I'm just drilling straight through this nut. So this one's off. I probably have to do that to the other three on this car, but I'm not going to be replacing these joints on this car. This was for an example only. Now let's go back into the shop, and I'll share with you a few other insights on what you need to know if you're going to take on this job yourself. Remember, the kit we sell on my website comes with complete instructions, so I won't be going over any instructions in detail. Replacing these parts is a DIY job, and I think you've clearly seen from this video that it can be a fairly simple job if you have a nice clean W126. Now, I did mention sedans, but the same thing applies to the big SEC coupes. They have the same problem, the same type of front suspension. So if you're going to tackle this job on your own, there's a couple things you need to know. First, you should get the car up, take the wheels off, and inspect for rust. If you know ahead of time that you're going to have to deal with rust, it's a lot easier than getting all the parts and then realizing, oh, I might need something else. And I'll explain that a little bit later here. But our kit comes with pretty much everything you need. This can be done with a lot of hand tools. It can be done without removing the front spring safely. But you do need a way to jack up the car and support it safely. And that's really important if you're doing this yourself in the driveway. But one of the things I've learned in doing this job is as soon as you remove this casting and the support rod, the front suspension tends to want to move aft because of the spring tension. It's not going to come off, but it tends to move aft. So when you go to put the new joint on and thread it onto the brake control rod, you don't have enough space. So you need to move the front suspension forward. You follow me? And that's why I recommend you use a cable winch. And I explain how to use this in my instructions. But a cable winch will allow you to hook onto the front suspension, go up there and hook on to some part under the front bumper and winch the front suspension forward so that you can complete the job. So it's not that difficult unless you have a rusty car. And that's why I wanted to shoot this video and post on YouTube, just to warn you what you may run into. But if you decide you're going to do this job yourself, you go to my website. We provide the kit, and you can buy the winch as an add-on because, you know, some of you already have some type of ratcheting chain winch, cable winch, or whatever. But there's one thing you need to know, and that these kits do not come with these long bolts. I can't believe it. You know, you think, that's really the most important bolt. They come with a lot of other bolts, but they don't come with a long bolt. So I'm currently sourcing long bolts. Once again, I'll provide those as an add-on or an extra because they are pretty expensive. So that's why I'm recommending you do some exploratory work, you do some inspection before you order the kit and before you plan to do this job. But it is something you can do yourself, and you cannot believe the results of how the car will handle once you complete it.